Before we get started, make sure to subscribe to the channel and like this video. That way, you'll always stay connected to our stories and never miss the next adventure. Tommy wasn't supposed to be in the Mistwood Forest when the sky decided to throw a tantrum. He was supposed to be 300 kilometers west, dropping off medical supplies to a mining outpost, collecting his paycheck, and maybe, if the universe felt generous, getting back in time to catch the tail end of happy hour at the depot bar. Simple. Easy. The kind of milk-run job that let a guy pay rent without thinking too hard about mortality. Instead, here he was, fighting with a cargo skiff that had all the aerodynamic grace of a drunk refrigerator, while the sky turned the color of a fresh bruise and started spitting lightning like it had a personal grudge. "Come on, come on," Tommy muttered, jabbing at the navigation console with increasing desperation. The screen flickered, died, came back just long enough to show him a completely useless error message, then died again for good. "Oh, perfect. Yeah, that's great. Love that for me." The wind hit like a physical punch, sending the skiff into a sideways spin that made his stomach relocate somewhere near his throat. Rain hammered against the viewport. Not the normal kind of rain, but the angry kind. The kind that sounded like the planet was personally offended by his existence. Tommy had been flying cargo routes for 6 months across 4 different frontier worlds, and he'd learned a few things. First, the universe didn't care about your plans. Second, frontier worlds had weather that would make meteorologists weep. Third, and most important, when everything went wrong at once, the best you could do was aim for the least deadly option and hope. He aimed for the trees. Not his finest moment, tactically speaking. But between trees and 40,000-foot drop into a canyon full of crystal formations that would turn him into abstract art, he'd take the trees. The skiff clipped the canopy with a sound like the world's worst can opener. Branches exploded around him. Something important-sounding tore off the undercarriage. The emergency alarms were screaming so many different warnings that they just blended into one continuous note of mechanical panic. Tommy gripped the controls and did absolutely nothing useful. Because at this point, physics was driving, and physics had terrible taste in parking spots. Impact. Everything went sideways, then upside down, then several directions that shouldn't exist in 3-dimensional space. Tommy's harness dug into his chest hard enough to bruise. His head smacked against something padded, but still deeply unpleasant. The skiff plowed through what felt like 80 metric tons of vegetation before a tree trunk, probably ancient, definitely unimpressed, brought the whole catastrophe to a stop. Silence. Well, not silence. The storm was still raging, rain pounding on the crumpled hull like nature's drum solo. But the skiff had stopped trying to kill him, which counted as progress. Tommy sat there for a moment, doing a mental inventory. Arms, worked. Legs, present. And functional. Head, attached, probably not concussed, though that was optimistic. Various aches and pains, yes, all of them, everywhere. "Okay," he said to nobody. "Okay, that happened." He hit the harness release, dropped about 6 inches because the skiff was tilted at an angle that mocked the concept of level surfaces, and stumbled toward the rear hatch. The control pad was dead, naturally, so he grabbed the manual release and cranked it like his life depended on it. Which, given the smell of something electrical burning somewhere in the cargo bay, it absolutely did. The hatch groaned open, and the storm reached in to say hello. Rain immediately soaked him to the skin. The temperature had dropped about 20 degrees since he'd been airborne, which put it somewhere in the range of unpleasant to "your ancestors didn't leave Earth for this nonsense." Tommy squinted into the darkness. The forest was dense, ancient. the kind of place that had never heard of convenient hiking trails. His skiff had carved a path of destruction through the canopy, leaving broken branches and scorched vegetation in its wake. The emergency beacon was, well, it was probably doing beacon things, assuming it hadn't become part of the wreckage's modern art installation. He needed to find shelter, get a fire going, wait for rescue, which would come eventually, because the company didn't like losing cargo haulers. Bad for insurance rates. That was the plan. Then he heard the sound. At first, Tommy thought it was the wind doing weird things through the broken trees. But no, there was a pattern to it, a rhythm, something alive, something small, something making noises that hit a frequency somewhere between distressed and genuinely terrified. Chirping. No, not quite chirping. Whimpering? Growling? Some combination that his earth-trained brain didn't have a reference for. Every survival instinct Tommy possessed said, don't. Whatever that is, it's not your problem. You've got your own situation to deal with. Walk away. He walked toward it instead, because, apparently, his survival instincts had terrible veto power. The sound was coming from about 30 meters away, past a tangle of underbrush that seemed personally designed to scratch every exposed bit of skin. Tommy pushed through, using his emergency flashlight to cut through the darkness and rain. What he found made him stop dead. Wreckage. Not his wreckage. Different wreckage. Smaller craft. Sleeker design. The kind of thing that cost more than Tommy would make in 5 years. It had impacted hard, nose first, into the forest floor. Back end propped up against a massive tree trunk. The hull was cracked open like someone had taken a can opener to expensive machinery. And underneath a collapsed section of the cargo area, trapped behind a twisted support beam and a panel that had folded like origami, were 3 of the most terrifying things Tommy had ever seen. Cubs had to be cubs, because they were small, relatively speaking. Each one maybe the size of a large dog, but built wrong, built like nightmares trying to figure out geometry. 6 legs ending in claws that could probably open him like a can of soup. Fur that looked more like crystalline filaments, currently matted with rain and mud. Faces that were somewhere between wolf and bear, with eyes that caught his flashlight beam and reflected it back in colors that didn't exist in Earth's spectrum. Ithran cubs. Tommy had seen exactly 2 Ithrans in his entire life, both times from a very safe distance, both times when he was behind very sturdy barriers. Ithrans were apex predators from a heavy-gravity world, the kind of species that evolution had designed to be really, really good at the whole killing things business. They were also members of the Galactic Union, highly intelligent, deeply honorable, and absolutely terrifying when motivated. Their cubs, apparently, were also terrifying, just smaller, and currently trapped, injured, and making sounds that translated across any language as help. One of them saw him. Its eyes, crystalline blue, way too intelligent, locked onto his face. It made a sound, high-pitched and desperate, and tried to push against the debris, pinning it down. The effort made it whimper, a sound so pathetically young and scared that Tommy felt something in his chest twist uncomfortably. "Oh no," Tommy said. "No, no, no. Don't do that. Don't make that sound." The cub made the sound again. The other 2 joined in, a chorus of terrified children trapped in bodies designed to be predators but currently just being scared kids. Tommy stood there in the rain, weighing his options. Leave them. They weren't his responsibility. He didn't owe them anything. Their parents were probably nearby, probably searching, probably equipped with much better survival skills than one human cargo pilot. Walking away was the smart choice, the logical choice, the choice that wouldn't get him killed by either the environment or a grateful but instinctively dangerous Itharan parent showing up. He looked at the cubs. They looked back at him with eyes that were too aware, too hopeful. "This is stupid," Tommy informed them. "You know that, right? This is monumentally stupid." He moved toward the wreckage anyway, because apparently today was the day Tommy's decision-making skills decided to take a vacation. The debris wasn't impossible to move, just heavy and awkward and absolutely not designed for one exhausted human to handle alone. Tommy braced his shoulder against the support beam, found leverage against a relatively stable piece of hull, and pushed. The beam shifted. Not much, but enough. The cubs scrambled backward, or tried to. One of them was clearly injured, its left rear leg twisted at an angle that made Tommy's own leg ache in sympathy. The smallest one was shaking so hard it looked like it might vibrate apart. "Hey," Tommy said, keeping his voice low and steady. "Hey, it's okay. I'm not gonna hurt you. I'm just... Hold on. Let me..." He pushed again. The beam shifted more. The panel groaned, then collapsed outward with a crash that made all three cubs flinch. But they were free, the opening wide enough for them to escape. They didn't escape. They just huddled there, staring at him with those impossible eyes, torn between terror and something else. Hope? Trust? The desperate calculation of creatures who knew they were trapped, and this weird-smelling stranger was the only option available? Tommy crouched down, making himself smaller, less threatening. He pulled out one of his emergency ration bars, something that tasted like cardboard, had passionate but ultimately disappointing relations with peanut butter, and broke off a piece. "Look," he said, holding it out. "Food. It's not great food, but it's food. See? I'm eating it too." He took a bite to demonstrate, made a face because it really was terrible, then held out another piece. The bold one, because there was always a bold one, crept forward. Its movements were jerky, unpracticed, the kind of coordination that came from being young and still figuring out how all 6 legs worked together. It sniffed the ration bar, sneezed, then carefully took it with teeth that were already sharp enough to be concerning. The other 2 watched, waited. When the bold one didn't immediately die from poison, they crept forward too. Tommy sat in the rain, surrounded by 3 predator cubs, feeding them terrible ration bars and wondering at what point his life had become this particular kind of absurd. The storm wasn't letting up. If anything, it was getting worse. "All right," Tommy said, standing slowly. "New plan. We find shelter, we wait this out, and we don't die. Sound good?" The cubs stared at him. "Great. Unanimous decision. Democracy works." He started walking, looking for anything that resembled shelter. Behind him, after a moment of hesitation, he heard the sound of 6 legs, times 3, following through the mud and rain. This was definitely the stupidest thing he'd ever done. No question. Top of the list, Hall of Fame bad decision. But somehow, with 3 terrified alien cubs trailing behind him like the world's most dangerous ducklings, Tommy couldn't quite bring himself to regret it. Not yet, anyway. Finding shelter in the mistwood forest during an apocalyptic storm turned out to be exactly as fun as it sounded, which was to say, not at all. Tommy trudged through mud that tried to steal his boots with every step, his flashlight cutting weak paths through the darkness, while 3 Itharan cubs followed him like he had any idea what he was doing. Spoiler: he absolutely did not. The bold one kept pace beside him, occasionally bumping against his leg like it was testing whether he was real or just a really detailed hallucination. The cautious one hung back, watching everything with eyes that tracked movement way too well for Tommy's comfort. And the smallest one, the injured one, was limping badly, making little sounds of pain that went straight through whatever part of Tommy's brain was responsible for not adopting dangerous alien wildlife. "Okay, listen," Tommy said over his shoulder, as if they understood. "I need you to work with me here. I'm looking for a cave, an overhang, a particularly aggressive rock formation, anything that doesn't involve us drowning while standing up." The bold cub chirped at him. Tommy decided to interpret that as agreement. Luck, or maybe just the universe feeling guilty about the whole crashing thing, delivered. A rock formation jutted out from a hillside about 60 meters ahead, creating a natural overhang that extended into what looked like an actual cave mouth. Not huge, not comfortable, but dry. Probably. "There," Tommy said, pointing. "That's home, temporarily. Don't get attached." They made it inside just as the lightning decided to get really enthusiastic about its job. The cave was bigger than it looked from outside, maybe 5 meters deep, wide enough for all of them, plus some personal space. The floor was rocky but mostly level, and more importantly, it was dry. Tommy collapsed against the wall, breathing hard. His entire body felt like one continuous bruise. The cubs huddled near the entrance, watching the storm with what looked like genuine fear. The smallest one was shaking again, and not from cold. Well, not just from cold. Cold. Right. That was going to be a problem. Tommy looked at the cubs, then at his soaked clothing, then at the temperature readout on his wrist unit that cheerfully informed him it was now 4 degrees and dropping. Itherans came from a heavy gravity world with a completely different climate baseline. These cubs were built for different conditions, and judging by how they were shivering, wet and freezing, wasn't it? "Fire," Tommy said out loud. "I need fire. You 3 need fire. We all need fire." He dragged himself upright and went back out into the storm, which seemed personally offended that he'd found shelter. The wreckage of his skiff was too far, but there was debris from the Itharan craft scattered through the forest. Tommy gathered what he could: pieces of hull plating, sections of interior paneling, anything that would burn. His emergency pack had a fuel cell, small, meant for heating rations, but it would work as an ignition source. Back in the cave, Tommy arranged the debris into something resembling a fire pit. He pulled out the fuel cell, set it in the center, then stacked the more flammable materials around it. The hull plating would reflect heat once he got things going. Basic survival stuff. The kind of thing they taught in frontier orientation. He activated the fuel cell. It glowed, caught, and flames started licking up the debris. The reaction from the cubs was immediate and intense. All 3 of them jerked backward, making sounds somewhere between alarm and fascination. Their crystalline eyes went wide, reflecting the firelight in patterns that looked almost hypnotic. The bold one took a step forward, then back, then forward again, like it couldn't decide between curiosity and self-preservation. "Yeah, fire," Tommy said, feeding more material into the growing flames. "You guys don't use this, right? I read that somewhere. Your homeworld went the route of biological heating or something. Well, humans? We're all about controlled combustion. It's kind of our thing." The fire grew, throwing heat and light into the cave. Tommy positioned himself between the flames and the cubs, trying to coax them closer without forcing it. Heat was already spreading through the space, turning it from miserable to merely unpleasant. The smallest cub moved first. It limped forward, one dragging leg making the movement awkward and painful to watch. It stopped just outside what it probably considered safe distance, and stared at the fire like Tommy had just invented magic. "It's okay," Tommy said softly. "It won't hurt you. Well, it will if you touch it, so don't touch it. But the heat? The heat is good. The heat is your friend." The cub crept closer, then closer. Finally, it collapsed near the fire, still a safe distance away, but close enough to feel the warmth. The shaking started to ease. The other two watched this experiment in trust, then made their own calculations. The bold one bounded over with less caution than was probably wise, nearly skidding into the fire pit before catching itself. The cautious one took its time, but eventually settled on Tommy's other side. And just like that, Tommy was sitting in a cave with 3 alien predator cubs, all of them arranged around a fire. Like this was some kind of incredibly bizarre camping trip. "So," Tommy said, because the silence felt weird, "this is my life now. This is what we're doing." The cubs stared at him. The fire crackled. Outside, the storm continued its percussion solo on the landscape. Tommy dug through his emergency pack and found more ration bars. The cubs had already proven they'd eat them, even if the nutritional value for their biology was probably questionable. He broke them into pieces and distributed them like he was feeding ducks at a park, except the ducks were 6-legged predators who could theoretically tear his throat out. They ate carefully, almost delicately. The smallest one took its piece and immediately tried to share it with the cautious one, which was simultaneously adorable and made Tommy's heart do uncomfortable things. "You 3 got separated from your parents, huh?" Tommy said, keeping his voice low and steady. "That's rough. I bet they're looking for you. They're probably worried sick." "Well, worried. Do Itharans get sick from worry? That's probably culturally insensitive to assume." The bold cub finished its food, and then, with the kind of confidence that only children possess, walked directly up to Tommy and head-butted his knee. "Ow," Tommy said. "Hey, personal space." The cub did it again, then made a sound that was almost purring. Could Itharans purr? That seemed biologically unlikely, but here he was, getting head-butted by a baby apex predator that was definitely making pleased noises. "You're ridiculous," Tommy informed it. "You know that? You're supposed to be terrifying." The cub responded by trying to climb into his lap, which was ambitious, considering it weighed at least 30 kilos and had more limbs than it had figured out how to coordinate. Tommy ended up with a lap full of damp, crystalline-furred alien that seemed convinced he was furniture. The other two watched this development, then apparently decided it looked comfortable because they scooted closer too. "No, no, no," Tommy protested weakly. "This is not. We're not doing this. I'm not a—" The smallest cub, the injured one, pressed against his side and made a sound so small and sad that Tommy's protests died in his throat. "Fine," he muttered. "Fine. But this is temporary. When your parents show up, you're going back to being terrifying. And I'm going back to being appropriately scared of you." The cubs settled in, their body heat combining with the fire's warmth to create something almost comfortable. Tommy found himself automatically adjusting his position to support the injured one's leg, making sure it wasn't bearing weight on the bad angle. The storm raged on. Hours passed. Tommy couldn't tell how many. He fed the fire whenever it started to dim, using pieces of wreckage he'd dragged inside earlier. The cubs slept in shifts, one always awake and watching, which was probably instinct from their species' evolution. At some point, the bold one decided Tommy's boot was prey and launched a hunt that involved pouncing, biting the laces, getting tangled, and then looking betrayed when the boot failed to fight back. "That's not food," Tommy said, trying not to laugh. "That's footwear. Different category entirely. The cub ignored him and attacked the boot again with renewed determination. The cautious one watched this display with what Tommy could only interpret as second-hand embarrassment. Around what might have been midnight or 3 in the morning, or possibly next Tuesday, time had lost all meaning. The smallest cub started whimpering. Its injured leg was clearly hurting. Tommy carefully examined it by firelight, trying to remember the basic first aid training that had seemed so boring in orientation. He couldn't set the leg properly, not without supplies and knowledge of Itharan physiology. But he could stabilize it. He used strips torn from his jacket and some straight pieces of debris to create a makeshift splint, working slowly and talking the whole time in what he hoped was a soothing voice. The cub let him work, watching his face with those 2 intelligent eyes. When he finished, it licked his hand. The tongue was rough, warm, and completely unexpected. "You're welcome," Tommy said quietly. The cub curled back up against him and fell asleep. Tommy sat there, keeping the fire going, surrounded by 3 predator cubs who had decided, against all logic and survival instinct, that he was safe, that he was pack. Outside, the storm showed no signs of stopping. "This is fine," Tommy muttered to the darkness. "Everything is fine. Nothing about this situation is completely insane." The bold cub snored. It was actually cute, which felt like a betrayal of everything Tommy understood about the universe. He fed the fire and waited for dawn. Dawn came eventually, because that's what dawn did, even when you were exhausted, covered in alien cubs, and seriously reconsidering your life choices. The storm had finally exhausted itself sometime in the early hours, leaving behind a dripping, steaming forest, and the kind of silence that felt almost aggressive after all that noise. Tommy's fire had burned down to embers. The cubs were still asleep, piled on and around him like he was the world's least qualified space heater. He must have dozed off at some point, because when his eyes snapped open, it wasn't because of anything the cubs did. It was because something outside the cave was moving. Multiple somethings, moving with purpose, with coordination, with the kind of tactical precision that made every hair on Tommy's neck stand up and salute. The cubs felt it too. All 3 were instantly awake, ears, or whatever those crystalline protrusions were, swiveling toward the cave entrance. The bold one moved in front of Tommy. The cautious one pressed against his side. The smallest one, despite its injury, tried to stand. Tommy very carefully, very slowly, reached for a piece of debris that could maybe serve as a weapon if he got really optimistic about his chances. A shadow appeared at the cave entrance, then another, then 6 more, spreading out in a pattern that Tommy recognized from every military operation vid he'd ever seen. Perimeter formation. Containment. They weren't just searching. They were hunting. The first figure stepped into the dim light filtering through the cave entrance, and Tommy's already questionable situation got significantly worse. Itharan. Adult. Fully grown. Wearing what was unmistakably combat armor that looked like it could shrug off small arms fire, and carrying a weapon that made Tommy's improvised debris club look like a particularly sad joke. The Itharan was massive, easily 2.5 meters tall, 6 legs that moved with mechanical precision, crystalline fur that seemed to shimmer with patterns that probably meant something in their body language. The armor was dark, fitted perfectly to that alien frame, and marked with symbols Tommy didn't recognize, but suspected translated roughly to, "We're very good at our jobs, and those jobs involve violence." More Itharans filed in behind the first. 6 total, all armed, all moving like they'd trained together for years. Elite soldiers. Had to be. You didn't move like that without serious training and probably a concerning amount of combat experience. The lead Itheran's eyes, bright amber, nothing like the cub's blue, swept the cave, took in the fire, took in Tommy, took in the three cubs who were now making noises that were part greeting, part relief, part confusion. Then those amber eyes locked onto Tommy with an intensity that made him very aware of his own mortality. "So," Tommy said, "because when you were probably about to die, you might as well commit to the bit." "I can explain." The lead Itheran made a sound, deep, resonant, nothing like the cub's chirping. Orders, maybe. Commands. Two of the other soldiers moved forward, weapons trained on Tommy with the kind of casual competence that suggested they could shoot him in 17 different ways before he finished blinking. The cubs reacted immediately. The bold one planted itself directly between Tommy and the soldiers, growling. Actually growling, with intent, at armed military personnel from its own species. The smallest one pressed harder against Tommy's leg, making distressed sounds. The cautious one looked between Tommy and the soldiers, clearly torn between instinct and whatever bizarre pack bonding had happened overnight. The lead Itheran's head tilted. Its stance shifted, just slightly. Something in its body language changed. Tommy couldn't read it, didn't know their culture well enough, but it felt significant. When it spoke, the translator built into Tommy's emergency gear kicked in with a lag that made the words sound disconnected from the movement. "You are human." Not a question. An observation delivered in a tone that suggested mild surprise, like finding a human in a cave with 3 Itheran cubs registered somewhere between unexpected and biologically improbable. "Yeah," Tommy said, very aware that his hands were still raised. "Yeah, that's me. Human. Standard model. Just your average cargo pilot who happened to crash in the same storm as these 3 and made some really questionable decisions about survival priorities." The Itheran's eyes narrowed. "You found them. Crashed near them, technically. They were trapped. There was debris. They were making noises that suggested they weren't thrilled about the situation. I helped. We came here, built a fire, survived the night. And now you're here, which is great, really great, because I have no idea what I'm doing and they probably need actual medical attention from someone who understands their biology." Tommy was babbling. He knew he was babbling. But the alternative was screaming, and that seemed less productive. One of the other soldiers spoke, rapid-fire sounds that the translator struggled with. The lead Itheran responded, then looked back at Tommy, studied him, studied the cubs, studied the remains of the fire, the makeshift splint on the smallest cub's leg, the scattered ration bar wrappers. "They permitted you to touch them," the Itheran said. Still that flat tone, but something underneath it now. Surprise? Confusion? "They permitted you to tend their injuries." "I mean, permitted is a strong word," Tommy said. "They were scared, hurt, cold. I helped. They tolerated it. We came to an understanding based on mutual desire to not die in a storm." The bold cub chose that moment to headbutt Tommy's leg again, then looked at the lead soldier and made a sound that was unmistakably proud. The soldier's stance shifted again. Its ears, the crystalline protrusions, angled forward. When it spoke next, its voice had changed. Still alien, still filtered through the translator's mechanical interpretation, but different. "I am Commander Jormathy. Night Fangs, Elite Guard, 2nd Division. These children were our responsibility." "Tommy," Tommy supplied. "No cool title, just Tommy. Cargo hauler, 1st Division of trying not to get killed by my own decisions." Something that might have been amusement flickered across Jormathi's face. Or what Tommy hoped was amusement, because the alternative was indigestion, and that seemed less optimistic. Jormathi moved closer, slowly, carefully. The cubs tracked the movement, but didn't scatter. When the commander was 3 meters away, it stopped and did something with its posture that made its armor seem less threatening. Some kind of cultural gesture, maybe. Submission? Respect? Tommy's xenocultural training was severely lacking. You are aware, Jormathi said carefully, that Ithran young are difficult, distrustful. They barely tolerate their extended family in the first months. They certainly do not permit strangers near them. To touch them is to invite injury. To approach when they are frightened is to guarantee it. Yeah, well, Tommy said, shrugging. They were kids. Scared kids. Sometimes you do what needs doing, you know? Jormathi stared at him. The other soldiers were staring too. Tommy was getting really tired of being stared at. You built fire, Jormathi continued. We do not use fire. Our technology evolved differently. You introduced them to something they have no instinctual understanding of, and they accepted it. Accepted you. The fire was warm, Tommy said. Like that explained everything. They were cold. Math was pretty simple. The smallest cub limped forward, navigating around Tommy's leg to approach Jormathi directly. It made small sounds, greeting, maybe, then looked back at Tommy like it was showing off a particularly interesting rock it had found. Jormathi knelt. The motion was smooth, graceful despite the armor and the 6 legs. It extended one clawed hand toward the cub, who sniffed it, accepted it, then immediately turned back to press against Tommy's leg again. The commander went very, very still. What are their names? Tommy asked, because the silence was getting uncomfortable. I've been calling them bold, cautious, and small, but that seems rude now that proper introductions are happening. You did not ask their names, Jormathi said quietly. They're cubs. They don't speak standard. Seemed pointless. Yet you cared for them. Yeah, well... Tommy shifted his weight, suddenly feeling awkward. Didn't need names for that. Jormathi stood, made a gesture to the other soldiers, who immediately lowered their weapons. The commander approached Tommy directly now, close enough that Tommy had to crane his neck back to maintain eye contact. You protected our young, Jormathi said, at personal risk, without hesitation, without knowledge of consequence or reward. I mean, there was some hesitation, Tommy said. Quite a bit, actually. But yeah, basically. Do you understand what this means in our culture? Tommy blinked. That I'm not terrible? Something that was definitely amusement crossed Jormathi's face. We have a concept, pack oath. One who protects our children becomes family, becomes pack. It is our highest honor. Oh, Tommy said. Then, processing, oh, wait, I wasn't trying to... Yet you did. Jormathi turned to the cubs. They know. They have chosen. This is not something that can be unchosen. The bold cub chirped agreement and tried to climb Tommy's leg. This is insane, Tommy said. You know that's insane, right? Jormathi's translator rendered what might have been a laugh. Yes, but honor rarely concerns itself with sanity. Getting out of the forest turned into a production that would have been hilarious if Tommy wasn't so exhausted he could barely remember his own species. The elite guard had extraction coordinates about 2 kilometers north, where the terrain was stable enough for a transport to land. 2 kilometers didn't sound like much until you factored in the post-storm mud, the uncertain footing, Tommy's collection of bruises that had bruises, and 3 Itheran cubs who had collectively decided that walking independently was for other people's cubs. The smallest one refused to leave Tommy's side, limping along on its splinted leg and making pitiful sounds whenever he got more than 2 meters away. The bold one kept darting ahead, then circling back like it was hurting him. And the cautious one, who apparently had opinions about proper formation, positioned itself at Tommy's left flank, like a very small, very determined bodyguard. "You know," Tommy said to nobody in particular, "when I woke up yesterday, this was not on my agenda." Jormathi, walking alongside with that unsettling grace that all Itherans seem to possess, made a sound the translator interpreted as agreement. "Few things of significance appear on agendas." "That's very philosophical for a soldier." "Philosophy keeps you alive when tactics fail." Tommy couldn't argue with that. The journey took an hour, longer than it should have, because the smallest cub needed frequent breaks, and the bold one kept trying to hunt things. At one point, it attempted to take down a piece of wind-blown debris, got thoroughly tangled, and had to be rescued by one of the other elite guard soldiers, who looked simultaneously professional and deeply amused. When they finally reached the extraction point, Tommy saw the transport waiting. Sleek, military-grade, the kind of ship that cost more than his entire neighborhood. And standing beside it, flanked by more guards, were 2 adult Itherans who radiated the kind of presence that suggested important people with important jobs. The female moved first. She crossed the clearing in 4 bounding strides, and suddenly the cubs were scrambling toward her, making sounds that needed no translation. Relief. Joy. Home. She gathered them, all 3 at once, somehow managing the geometry of 6-legged children despite her own 6 legs, and made sounds that were pure parental emotion. The translator didn't even try to render it into words. Some things were universal enough. The male joined them, his posture careful, controlled, but Tommy could see the way his crystalline fur rippled with patterns that probably meant something significant in Itharan body language. Then the female looked up, found Tommy with eyes that were the same crystalline blue as her children's, and Tommy suddenly understood why the elite guard carried really big weapons. She handed the cubs to her mate and approached Tommy with purpose. Jormathi moved to intercept, said something quick in their language that the translator garbled. She responded without breaking stride. When she was close enough that Tommy could count every crystalline filament in her fur, she stopped, studied him. Tommy had never felt more analyzed in his life. "You are the human," she said. Her voice was different from Jormathi's, higher, but with harmonics that suggested complexity his translator wasn't equipped to handle. "That's me," Tommy said, because what else was there to say? "Tommy, cargo pilot, professional bad decision-maker. Your cubs are great, by the way, very determined. The bold one tried to fight my boot." Her head tilted. "You protected them." "They were kids in a storm. Wasn't much of a choice." "There is always a choice." She moved closer. Tommy's hindbrain screamed at him to run, but his legs had apparently decided that dignity was more important than survival. "You could have fled. Most would have. Most species would have seen predators and chosen self-preservation." "Yeah, well, they were making scared noises. I'm bad at ignoring scared noises." The male had joined them now, cubs still clinging to him but watching the conversation with intense focus. He spoke, his voice deeper, more resonant. "Our daughter showed us her injury. The splint you made. Crude, but effective. You have medical training?" "I have watched a first aid video once training," Tommy admitted, "and a strong desire to not let kids suffer, if I could help it." You did not know their value, the female said. It wasn't a question. Their value was that they were kids, Tommy said, feeling his exhaustion fray into something sharper. That's it. That's the whole equation. I didn't need to know if they were important or wealthy or connected to anyone. They were children. They needed help. I helped. That's not special. That's just baseline not being terrible. Silence. The kind that felt heavy, significant. Jormathi was watching him with an expression Tommy couldn't read. The other guards had gone very still. The female made a sound, not words, something else. Then she did something with her posture that made her armor seem to flow differently. I am Minister Ithandra, Diplomatic Corps, 3rd Assembly. This is my mate, Minister Corvin. Our children were, under military protection during transport to the summit negotiations when the storm struck. Okay, Tommy said, processing. So they're important kids? They are our children, Corvin said simply. That is their importance. Something in Tommy's chest loosened slightly. Yeah, exactly. Ithandra moved closer still, close enough to touch, though she didn't. Commander Jormathi explained Pack Oath. You understand what this means? That I accidentally triggered a cultural thing by not letting kids die? That you are family now. To them. To us. This bond cannot be broken by time or distance. You are Pack. Tommy looked at the cubs, who were watching him with those 2 intelligent eyes. The smallest one made a sound, soft, hopeful. The bold one was practically vibrating with the effort of not launching itself in his direction. I didn't do anything special, Tommy said quietly. I couldn't leave them. That's not heroic. That's just being a person. No, Jormathi said, and there was something in the commander's voice now. Most beings would have calculated risk, weighed value, considered consequence. You saw children and acted. That is precisely what makes it special. Your species, Ithandra said, is new to the Union. We have studied your history, your psychology, your cultural patterns. We classified you as cautious, risk-averse, overly emotional but paralyzed by fear of consequence. Yeah, well, Tommy said, maybe we're just emotional about kids. Perhaps, Corvin said, we have miscalculated what that emotion drives you toward. The cubs finally broke free of their father's grasp and swarmed Tommy. All 3 at once, a tangle of 6-legged affection and crystalline fur and enthusiastic headbutts. Tommy staggered, caught himself, and found himself sitting in the mud with a lap full of alien predators who were absolutely convinced he was the best thing that had ever happened to them. Hey, he protested weakly, come on, you're going home, actual home, with your parents, not a cave with a fire and terrible ration bars. The smallest one looked up at him and made a sound so plaintive that Tommy felt his heart crack. They will not forget, Ithandra said softly. We do not forget. What you have given them, safety, warmth, care when they were abandoned by circumstance, this becomes part of who they are, part of who we are. I just kept them alive through one night. You gave them more than survival. You gave them trust, showed them that the galaxy contains beings who will protect them without calculation of gain. Jormathi stepped forward. The guard owes you debt. The ministers owe you debt. I owe you personally. Those children were my responsibility, and I failed them. You succeeded where training and technology failed. I got lucky, Tommy said. Wrong place, right time, questionable judgment. Nevertheless, Joramathi's posture shifted into something formal. "We would offer you position, not as guard. You lack the physical capability, no offense intended, but as liaison, cultural bridge, someone who understands what matters beyond tactics and protocol." Tommy blinked. "You're offering me a job?" "We're offering you purpose," Ithandra corrected. "If you want it, no obligation. Pack oath does not require service. But your perspective, your instinct, the Union needs voices like yours. Humans who act before calculating, who see children before threat profiles." Tommy looked at the cubs, at their parents, at Jormathi and the assembled soldiers who were watching him like he'd done something profound instead of just basic decency. "I'm not special," he said again, quieter now. "No," Corvin agreed. "You are simply human. Perhaps that is what we have been missing." 3 weeks later, Tommy sat in his new quarters, significantly nicer than his old cargo hauler bunk, with actual windows and everything, and read the message that had just come through. It was from Ithandra. The cubs were thriving, adjusting well to being home, already stronger and more confident. They were learning standard, learning protocols, learning all the things diplomat children needed to know. And they'd insisted on naming their newest sibling, currently still an egg in the family's care chamber, after the human who'd shown them that safety could come from unexpected places. The name, translated loosely, meant firekeeper who guards the small. Tommy laughed. Actually laughed, head back, full-throated. The kind of laugh that came from exhaustion and relief and the sheer absurdity of existence. He'd crashed in a storm, found some scared kids, kept them alive, and somehow that had become the most important thing he'd ever done. Not because it was heroic, not because it was special, but because, when the choice came, between walking away and staying, he'd stayed. And maybe, Tommy thought as he looked out at the star field beyond his window, maybe that was enough. Maybe that was everything. Maybe humanity's greatest strength wasn't in being stronger or smarter or more advanced. Maybe it was just in giving a damn when it mattered most. He pulled up his message interface and started typing a response to Ithandra. Something casual about hoping the cubs were staying out of trouble and not attacking too many boots. Outside his window, ships moved through the darkness. Humans, Itherans, dozens of other species, all navigating the galaxy together. And somewhere out there, 3 cubs were growing up, knowing that when everything went wrong, a stranger had chosen to help. Tommy figured that was worth crashing for, even if his insurance premiums were never going to recover.